Good afternoon, everyone. I certainly am gratified by your presence here today and really excited about our second installment of the President's Lecture Series on Justice, Equity, and Inclusion. And really pleased with the area of focus for today. As I attend these, I feel like they just get better and better in terms of the direct impact that it can have on our university community. Today's focus will be on supporting students starts with basic needs. It's no secret whatsoever that basic needs has been on the minds of many universities for some time now, because understanding how important it is to embrace the barriers that students face on a regular basis, and knowing that there are those areas that are sometimes uncomfortable to talk about, dealing with food insecurity, housing insecurity, transportation insecurity. We could go on and on, mental health, that all of those are not always easy for students to bring to the attention of the university, that it's serving as a deterrent to their ability to not only stay focused, but oftentimes to stay engaged here in a way that it affects their academic performance as well as their persistence and completion. And so with that, we know that when you couple that with what's happening in the nation with respect to rising inflationary costs here and how that's impacting all of us, right? You know, if you go to the grocery store, you feel the difference. If you go to the gas station, you feel the difference. Obviously, on the housing side, utilities, on every front, costs are rising. And then when you think about how vulnerable many of our students are financially, not only just in terms of looking at the vast number of our students that are Pell eligible and receive federal funding, which is at about 50%, and that we've got even more students on top of that, make it very clear that due to the pandemic and other life circumstances, that it's been very tough for them. And that, you know, the piece that makes the best sense is that we never want a student to have to say twice or three times that they don't have money, that they don't have food, that they don't have childcare. We want to hear it one time and we step in and provide the resource that they need in order to keep them focused and, more importantly, to keep them retained. And so today, I think we're going to learn quite a bit about this topic, about basic needs. I know that it may seem a little complex because I think we're just really launching into it, but that we've got an expert here today that has had experience in this area, and not only experience, but can also speak to the outcomes of really developing very strong basic needs initiatives, and being relentless in terms of ensuring that we are paying close attention to our students and, more importantly, addressing those needs. We're very fortunate to have our interim vice president, Lynette Cook-Francis, who is going to not only lead us through the conversation, but lead us through today's session. When I say vice president, I should have said vice president, interim vice president for student success and student life. I take for granted that everyone knows who she is, but that more importantly, her background really has helped us tremendously while she has served in this interim role. She brings a wealth of experience under her leadership at John Jay College, which is part of the City University of New York. Her team won the first single-stop grant in the nation awarded to a four-year college. Initially funded by the Robin Hood Foundation, Single Stop has connected hundreds of thousands of students around the country to hundreds of millions of dollars in benefits to address food and housing insecurities and many other barriers to student success. So she brings that wealth with her, and we're working diligently before she comes out of that interim role and moves on to get us well on our way, and that this session today is really designed to help to know exactly the direction that we will take. So I will turn it over now to Ms. Lynette Cook-Francis, who will serve as our moderator for today's session.
Thank you, Dr. Blanchard. Hi, everyone. Good to see everyone here. I had one of those dreams last night, like what if you have a party and no one comes? You ever have that dream? So I'm glad somebody is here. It's wonderful to see you. I want to just say welcome. It's great to have everyone for this important discussion. Before I introduce our distinguished guest, I would like to, I'm looking for the, oh, it's here. I'd like to tell you a little bit, give you an overview about what's going on at UHD's campus regarding basic needs. Most of you all know probably that we have a food market, and I think we've had it since 2017, right, Jermaine? And that food market operated even through COVID and has served thousands of students per year. But we also have an IT area that has provided computers, laptops, tablets, and hotspots for students. We have areas like the Men of Legacy and the Maine Career Center, who have provided clothing, business clothing in particular, for students who are going out into the work world to interview and to start their careers. And we have a counseling center, now an in-house counseling center. It used to be outsourced, but now our own UHD counselors who have joined us in the last year or so. So there is a lot that is going on. And as you can see, and as you've heard, basic needs is a conversation across the country. It's one that we are happy to be a part of. And these are just some headlines pulled from recent media in the past week or so about what is going on across the country, not only for students, but for everyone. There are issues. And so a few months ago, a team of us at UHD started thinking about how we need to ramp up our basic needs offerings. And we started by getting a small planning grant from the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, which allowed us to do a survey of students. And we did a survey and a series of focus groups. Over 2,500 students responded to the survey, and we have interviewed over 200 students. And I just want to share just a little bit of that information. We are still looking at the data, but just so you know, the demographics of the student respondents track the demographics of UHD, with the largest population being Hispanic and then African American, and 65% of the students being first generation. So very similar to our makeup, and of course, a majority female group. When we talk about housing, students talk about having difficulty paying their rent or their mortgage, and being behind in their rent or mortgage, and the cost of utilities being problematic for them, with 39% of students experiencing having difficulty paying for their utilities. In terms of food security, students do talk about, 53% of our students say that they are sometimes or often worried that they're going to run out of food. That's in just the last 30 days, right? And then 41% of them say that the food that they had didn't last, and that 37% of them said that they have cut the size of their meals to address this issue. In terms of transportation, you see that 26% of our students rely on other means of transportation than to get in, than driving in themselves. And that 33% of those students say that they missed at least one class due to transportation issues. Something really important for our faculty to recognize, that students have trouble getting into school, which is work. And then the top 4 reasons for their not using the resources that we have, it's not unusual, right? Because we hear this all of the time. Even when we have things, people don't know about them. Drives us crazy, right? But there's the truth of it. They don't know how to access these resources. They haven't heard of the resources. They don't have time to access them, or they don't know if they're eligible. And so that just gives you an idea of just a few of the details of what is going on with our students. And with that, I want to also let you know that we have a number of members of our team from the Basic Needs group here, and I just want to make sure you all know who they are. For instance, we have Dr. Vida Robertson, and Dr. Hope Pamplin, and Director Tremaine Kwapisi, and we have Dr. Eliza Alonzo, we're Dr. Charlie Finch, Vice President Jay Zambrano. Who did I miss? There's Dr. Gemma Sylvester Caesar. Anyone else? Oh, yes, and Scott. And Scott, who really is the founder of the feast. Thank you, Scott, who made, and Eliza and Scott are the folks who made this day happen. So I want to say thank you. And I'm going to ask that group and anybody else to be part of this conversation. It is not just our guest and me speaking. It is all of us with expertise to share, to join in. So with that, let me introduce our esteemed guest. Leanne Davis is a Senior Director and Education and Training Services at the Hope Center for College, Community, and Justice at Temple University. Go Philly. In this role, oh yeah, go Phillies. I'm sorry, I forgot. Yo, I went to school in Philadelphia, I'm sorry. Okay, well, why don't we just call it a day and leave now? I know I've ruined it. I'm sorry. I just was in Philly like at 9 o'clock last night, and so I got a code switch. I'm sorry. In this role, she leads the overall strategy and design for the Hope Impact Partnerships, HIP, collaborating with state, system, and institutional leaders who are interested in using real-time data to assess students' basic needs while receiving technical assistance to analyze, plan, and take action on their data. Leanne also leads the Hope Center's role in a National Science Foundation STEM research hub, which focuses specifically on STEM affordability and will explore non-tuition barriers for students from low-income backgrounds at community colleges. Leanne's work has been featured or quoted in numerous media outlets, USA Today, The Hechinger Report, Virginia Public Media, Inside Higher Education, Diverse Issues in Higher Education, and the Chronicle of Higher Education. Leanne holds a master's in higher education administration from GW, with a concentration in policy and finance, and a BS in political science from the United States Naval Academy. Get this, after graduating from the Naval Academy, Leanne was commissioned as a naval aviator flying CH-46 helicopters. So if you weren't cool enough, you can, I wish you would land a helicopter in this building and fly me out of here after that. Leanne, come on up. Let's have a great conversation about basic needs. Come on up. Thank you.
You already broke the ice by talking about baseball. I have to confess, I actually live in Seattle, Washington, and so I asked my 12-year-old if I should make a comment about the Astros beating the Mariners, and he said no, it probably wouldn't go over too well.
True. Well, let's get started. Here's my first question, Leanne, which is, the idea of starving students is not a new idea, right? It's as old as students. It's a trope. You know, eating ramen, being hungry. There's even a moving company called Starving Students. So what is different now with this concept of students and food insecurity and going hungry? Is it that our sensitivities are different to it? Or is it that the need is different, the hunger is different?
There's so many different ways that I think we could get into this, but as we talked about earlier, I think this idea of being a starving student was a rite of passage, right? It was something that you had to go through. If you were going to go to college, you were probably going to have a job on the other end. You knew it was these, years that you were going to starve, eat a lot of ramen probably, but you'd find a job. You'd find a job that paid well. You might be going back to work in the family business. You might be going to work for your father's law firm. Maybe you were going to go to medical school or something. And maybe you were going to work for a company where you would expect to spend the rest of your career working for that company, where you were going to have a 401k or you would have a pension benefits when you retired. It's not the way the world works anymore. I think we still had that idea when we were thinking about this system of post-secondary education that just really wasn't designed to serve all students.
Thank you. So given that, and building on the experiences of our students that I've just shared, it seems that universities are being asked to provide more social services, housing, food assistance, physical and mental health assistance. Would you agree that we are being asked to do more? Many people suggest that universities are becoming social service hubs.
The short answer, are we being asked to do more, is yes. But in truth, this is really what drives our work at the Hope Center. So if you're not familiar, the Hope Center is an action research center housed at the School of Medicine at Temple University, where we work to really transform higher education into a more effective, equitable, and impactful sector. And we do this through a combination of applied research, through technical assistance, through providing educational training services to colleges and universities, through policy advising and advocacy at both the state and federal level, and working with state and federal governments and agencies, and strategic communications. I think what the belief that undergirds our work is that students are humans first, and that their basic needs are central conditions for learning.
I hear it. I like that. And I was thinking about our conversation a little bit earlier. And, I think about my career in higher education has been spent trying to get more underserved students to attend college. And sometimes I feel like, we've gotten there. We're at the moment where we have more underserved students attending college than ever, but it requires higher education to shift, doesn't it? In what
Totally.
what we have to offer, and not necessarily dig in and say we're not a social service, because we've asked these students to come and they're here.
If you've asked them to come, they're here, they show up, then we need to be able to provide the support that students need in order to complete their degrees, in order to graduate, in order to have this degree that is going to help them to find a job, hopefully find a job that pays a living wage where they can support a family. If you really want to put it in policy terms, I guess we have to think about providing a more educated workforce, or an educated workforce, educated college graduates to meet our workforce demands. But I think what it comes down to is that we can't talk about student success and higher education outcomes unless we're talking about addressing basic needs and security. And we need all hands on deck in order to be able to do that.
So how do we do that financially? at the same time we have more students coming, we have less support from the federal government, from the state government, diminishing resources, greater need. So what is higher education doing?
We really are getting into the heavy questions. There's so many colleges that are doing this work, and I think it's really easy for it to feel isolated to this work that you're doing on campus to support your students who are coming to your campus. But what we hope that institutions and practitioners and all of you in the room realize is that you don't have to do it alone. There are ways that institutions can find colleagues at other institutions to be able to talk about what they're doing for peer-to-peer learning, for sharing of resources and best practices. This is something that we're doing through Hope Impact Partnerships, the program that I lead, but I'm not going to give a plug for HIP right now. You're already on the way, right? Looking at the stats and all the data that you shared from your survey kind of takes away some of the talking points that I had, but it really mirrors what we've learned and what we've seen from students across Texas and students across the country. You have people who are focused on, running the food pantry, right? And institutions can do some things to really help students, like destigmatize a lot of the way that we talk about public benefits. You can establish a basic needs center. This is what I think from your time and working in Single Stop and running Single Stop, is that organizing the institution's resources to provide this full spectrum of supports in one place really helps students to be able to maybe only have to ask once before they're able to get the help and the support that they need. I think there's a lot that we can get into. There's a really big, I think, policy component here too, where we're starting to talk about funding and how to make college more affordable and what can states do to make benefits more accessible for students. But it's hard you have to be able to take action with the resources that you have available to you.
I'm so curious about what parallels do you see or differences in the data that I shared with what you're seeing nationally with students?
It's pretty similar, and I think the stats are really unjust. In the last time that we administered our basic needs survey in 2020, 3 in 5 students reported that they were experiencing basic needs insecurity while they were in college. Nearly half of students reported that they were experiencing some form of housing insecurity. And this is the one that gets me. Over half of the students who reported experiencing basic needs insecurity did not apply for support because they did not know how.
It's the same thing here. Another thing that I've noticed with so many students is that they don't believe that they are deserving of the help or that there are other students who need the help more. And so I remember I would have a student who, whenever I met him, he was always looking for something to eat, right? I'd always keep something in my office, always. And he was the vice president of student government and always hungry. And I just thought he was a hungry young man, right? It turns out he was food insecure. He would never say anything. He was one of the students who voted to give money to emergency funding, but didn't think he deserved it himself because others deserved it more. And it's a story that has stuck with me for years.
Yeah, and sadly, it hasn't changed. And that's what we've seen too, that most students are not getting the help that they need with basic needs supports. 75% of students who are dealing with basic needs insecurity don't access the supports. Either they don't know the program exists, they don't think they're eligible, or they don't know how to apply, or they think someone else is more deserving in more need than they are.
See the same thing here. I was interested in what you were saying about kind of state and federal infrastructures to support basic needs, because a group of us just went to the California state system and looked at some of the basic needs programs at California State, Los Angeles, and Long Beach. And what we found is that it's part of the state mandate that universities cover basic needs for students, and they actually defined what basic needs are, and the universities are funded to support basic needs. I don't know if that is a possibility in Texas, but do you see that in other states besides California?
Absolutely. Another example that we could talk about would be Oregon, where the legislature passed a law that the institutions have to have a basic needs navigator on each of their campuses. And they provided funding for the Basic Needs Navigator program. And they actually provided funding for evaluation of that program so that they could really understand how well that program was being implemented and what they need to do to improve it. Other things that we're seeing are states that are passing hunger-free campus laws. And I think that's something that a number of institutions, I will say at the Hope Center, we worked with a task force and over the last year to develop an affordability agenda for Texas that we're actually working to present to the Texas Higher Ed Coordinating Board very soon. So I don't think I can give all the secrets away yet, but one of the things that we mentioned in there, that we mentioned as a recommendation is considering some form of hunger-free campus legislation, which will really allow the institutions to be able to do more.
Well, that's great news. You know, I saw Hope make a confirming face about when you mentioned the navigator, because Dr. Pamplin recently received a Trellis grant, which allows us to hire a navigator on this campus, so it's very exciting. I want to give some of the audience an opportunity to ask you some questions or to chime in on their own expertise around this topic, and we'll come back to some of my questions after. Anyone?
Sure. There are all different ways that you can envision collaboration that's going to work to serve students. One of the things that we talk about is how establishing partnerships with local social service agencies or community-based organizations so that you can have a referral system and that while you may not have that expertise or the person who can answer a lot of those questions right on your campus, you can partner directly with one of these organizations that you can refer students to so that you can ensure this continuity of care as you're sharing that relationship with students. I think it can also help ensure that you can maybe work with students as they're navigating how to apply for SNAP benefits and things like that. One really interesting partnership that we've seen is of where I live in Seattle, the United Way of King County is working with a number of institutions to provide benefits hubs. I see a lot of nodding there too, where they're able to take the United Way trained staff members and work directly with the institutions to provide that set of services. Right? They're a hub where they can help connect students to all types of public benefits and benefits they might be eligible for. But they can expand too. They can even deal with things like helping students to complete the FAFSA.
Oh, a few more questions.
Yeah, I was thinking that, in terms of some of the critics of basic needs and more importantly, food insecurity, is that by offering the food pantry that it's giving a fish as opposed to teaching them how to fish. What are your thoughts about that?
I think we need to treat students as human beings. I don't think we should question their need. I don't think we should question what they're experiencing. And I think we need to get over this concept. It's almost like brings me back to that idea of the starving student and the rite of passage. I think we need to get away from some of this mentality that you have to struggle in order for something to be earned or to be real. I think that's based in, I just think it's based in a way of a white supremacist culture that we need to get away from. And we need to really come back to creating a culture of care on our campuses.
Especially when you think of being one of the wealthiest countries in the world and having the most food in the world. Why should anybody be hungry to study? Yes.
Hello. Okay, so my question is, a lot of the questions or a lot of the issues of food nationally have kind of seemed to be better with universities, but for housing, how is housing becoming better for their students?
I'm getting really excited about the Walk to Vote campaign.
There's an alligator walking through the hallway. There's a great event going on right now called Walk to Vote, and they just walked across campus.
I love it. For those who may not be in the room or might not be watching the recording later, it's really exciting. There's a whole room with early voting stations set up, and I've been watching students go in there and people going to vote. It's fantastic.
And it's so connected, right, to basic needs and voting, right? So
exercise your rights in our
exercise your
democracy.
rights. Go ahead, please.
Do I have to repeat the question?
No, I'm just thinking about housing. We see pockets of innovation in housing, but it's just such a big challenge, particularly it's not just for four-year institutions, we see it for community colleges as well. Can you talk a little bit more about are you talking about on-campus housing, off-campus housing, or just students who might be experiencing housing insecurity?
Well, I guess in this instance, we are a off-campus school, so it's kind of like get here when you can and come to school, and what happens after school is on you. So, and I know a lot of community colleges are the same and other off-campus. So I was a part of the focus group, and I personally don't know any resources that how to get housing. Like I even looked up like housing vouchers, found out that they've been closed since 2016 because of the flood. So that's the most information that I've gotten on housing at all. So like that.
I think housing, in my time, my experience, housing is the hardest thing.
Yeah.
And clearly it's not just at the university level, it's everywhere. And the population of houselessness has increased so significantly. And we just never find a solution. They are all in the giving a fish category, where maybe you can get somebody housing for a few weeks or a month, but there's just such low availability. I don't know if anybody in this room has had any success stories in helping people to get housed. As a matter of fact, there are campuses now that actually allow people to kind of house in their cars in lots that they set aside, and they're secured, and they are maybe adjacent to a sports and fitness facility or something where people can go and take showers and use the restroom. But this is in California schools and places like that where it is just accepted that there is no housing.
I know, it's why I'm struggling with the answer, because I just I haven't seen a real structural solution to how we're going to address housing, because it's something it's affecting, it spreads so far, not just at the institutional level. This is something that we're seeing across the country, right? Housing is getting more unaffordable. Rents are going up. Inflation is making this a lot worse too.
Yeah. Yes.
So,
One thing that we did in California for some of the California universities, housing is very tough, especially with respect to cost, right? For everyone in California, much less a student. So that most of the universities had a housing advocate on campus. And that housing advocate would do two things. They would collect information on affordable housing, and that people could call in if they owned a place, a unit that had availability for one or more students, and that they would keep that information on hand, but also that when a student was trying to negotiate a contract, and for whatever reason, be it affordability or the fact that there are some that would not want students to actually rent from them, that it would be a university advocate that would be speaking on their behalf in order to negotiate their ability to get that housing. And so that's just one of the ways. And then I know that California was working, this before I left there, on really creating something more universal throughout the state, where there would be more affordable housing within the communities, as well as providing more funding for universities to erect more housing facilities on campus. I mean, as soon as you put one building up, it's already gone, right? Because housing is so tough there. But trying to find ability for campuses to erect more housing, and that more importantly, to not necessarily think that just because your housing facility is on your campus, that it's just for your students, that if there are any vacancies in housing at a nearby campus, that our students would be able to go and stay in those housing facilities. It's a real tough issue, but people are really trying very aggressively to think through how to cure some of the problems. Housing, which is really major in other states, I don't think it is as major here, but it doesn't undermine the fact that we know that we've got students that are living in their cars, that are couch surfing because they don't have a permanent residence.
Dr. Robinson had a question behind you.
Thank you so much for being here. We sincerely appreciate all your insights. My question has to do with institutionalization and our ability to scale our efforts. You had mentioned earlier about the notion of employing a navigator or having a concierge on campus to be able to allow students more access to certain resources. But even within that structural model, work days only have so many hours. Universities only have employees for so long. And so if we're really thinking about a ubiquitous, comprehensive way of coming in contact with thousands of students, of course, it couldn't depend on a singular individual in an isolated department. So I would love for you to speak to how we can break down that partition that separates student affairs from academic affairs and make the university much more both cognizant of the efforts that need to be employed and much more effective at making sure that each student becomes aware of those efforts and resources in order to truly educate the students that we've vowed to educate. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. I think it is a tough one, right? Trying to think about how to get this out of the silo of student affairs, get this out of the silo of just thinking, even in California, just thinking, or in Oregon where they have benefits navigators, just thinking you can have one person and you can put one person on campus and that's going to fix the problem. And that's not it. The way that we approach this is to think about this as an ecosystem of support. It's not just one solution or two solutions. It's about building the entire ecosystem to support students' basic needs and fundamentally rethinking the way that you serve your students. Think about, and I encourage all of you sitting here, think about what could your campus do to better connect students to public benefits, campus supports, or community resources. You need to get all of those people. I think you're starting it with this group that you've created that is focusing on basic needs, building a task force. Start to come up with a plan, but you have to say that basic needs is central to the academic enterprise. And this is something that you're doing. It's something that you are doing, and your leadership, you're making a statement and taking a stand by saying that this is a priority, and this is how we're going to embark on this journey of treating students, of encouraging a culture of care, and ensuring that we're not just meeting students' basic needs through student affairs, that this is something that is seen in the classroom as well. It's something we're destigmatizing some of this by changing what's on our syllabi, changing the way that we talk and interact with our students, the way whether we ask them to do this labor over and over by repeating their story again and again. Right.
We have some folks in the room who are kind of on the ground with students doing this work every day. And I think about the term destigmatization. And I know that in recent years, I have really seen that happen. Students more willing to use psychological services, students more willing to use basic needs services like a food market. And I wonder if Tremaine or Hope, who kind of are working with students on this level every day, have any observations about what you're seeing.
So I think that building a culture of care is very, very important, but we have to recognize where our students are coming from and when they come into our building, what that looks like. So building a culture of care means them having that relationship. Destigmatizing therapy is normal. It's okay to ask for help, but we have to model that on a regular basis and be a listening ear and build that relationship. So if I recognize and I know that, hey, same clothes from last 2 weeks I've seen you in, you good? They are comfortable saying, mm-mm. And then I can point them, and I'm not too busy to do so, but it has to come with a culture of care. So I have to make sure that students are first in everything that I do, but it has to be everybody's priority. And so I think that as we're looking at this work, we just have to flip the switch. And it's harder for others. It's harder for some than others, but be an example of that in everything that we do.
Yeah, and I think you bring up some really good points. I commend your comments, and I'm thankful for what we're doing. I think to Dr. Pamper's point, I have to address your question about housing. I think that's one of the things we have to do is stop in the moment and get some information. We do have some resources for you. The housing options are, it didn't stop in 2016. I think the pandemic kind of affected some things. We do have some partnerships with some other universities, and I'm willing to make a call today if that is your situation. So that's one of the things that I'm just working with and with teams or colleagues is that when we go to orientation and we speak about these services, when we speak about the food market and right there after somebody comes up and in the corner is like, hey, can you show it to me? Sure, let's walk down there right now. Oh, it's closed. I can open the door. And so we're working on things of that nature, and we're just trying to create an overall culture of care that is encompassing others. I think one of the other ways is that I think you bring up a brilliant point, or I think you were talking about with the silo work. A lot of times we do work in silos, and so we just have to push and break barriers. And so as I'm giving this information to a person, and I think Dr. Blanche, he shares that a lot as we go to our president's cabinet. He's like, there's a lot of great work going on here. You need to be sharing it. And so it's ironic, and one of my questions was going to be to you, is that a student who sits on president's cabinet heard something great in that meeting. They went home, they researched. We actually have some community grants here at the institution. It doesn't come from my area, it comes from an academic area. And they were like, hey, I got this great idea. I've been up all night. This just happened like 10 minutes ago. And I really want to do, and they brought up the idea about the homeless students that sleep in their cars on campus. She just brought this up. She's like, I really want to try this. Do you think it's a good idea? Yes. She wants to write this grant. And so what the question is, as I'm going to be kind of advising her, or you've seen times as Dr. Blanchard brought up with the critics, how have you been able to stay the course, or what advice may you give to stay the course when people, even internally, may be against the ideology that someone is pushing forward? I know it's a tough one.
I think you've already answered part of your own question. And I think the answer too is that you have to continue to model the care. I really believe that, I know there are other community college presidents out there who talk about this. I love our mayor of Seattle who talks about this, about love and just understanding that people are humans, and approaching this and approaching all these problems with love.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi there. My name is Dr. Nicole West. I'm an adjunct professor with Long Star. But my son attends U of H downtown here, and he's about to graduate. A lot that you stated is quite clear. The problem is when we're talking about the Basic Need Navigator program, I'm big on partnerships. We need to make sure that the organizations out there, whether it's the sororities, fraternities, Jack and Jill links, whatever that is, if you give us some of these basic needs that these kids have, instead of just picking up trash on the side of the road, you have a partnership. We have facets in each of these organizations that we're trying to work on to help students go to school, camps, and so forth. But I think going into a glamping camp, that's great and all, but wouldn't you like the organizations outside to help determine where these resources are? These organizations meet once a month or twice a month. And just getting them involved in terms of these basic needs, I think that's the issue. Also, when you said about white supremacy, I will tell you, it's so many kids that say, I don't have a story. They look back and think that the only story there is that my parent was incarcerated. I grew up with a large family and we had to live this way. We know that things will often change. Their parents will lose the jobs. So like you said, they're embarrassed. So we do have to get rid of that stigma. And I think you have partnerships and organizations out there that can help to do this. And I would utilize those in working with the Navigator program. That's what I would do.
Just thank you.
Thanks.
Rhonda.
So Rhonda Shear from Sports and Fitness. I recently met one of our UHD graduates and he found that he was living in the woods in a tent. He was homeless. And he graduated. And when I talked to him about his efforts and what was happening and how did we possibly fail him in some capacity, he said that wasn't the case at all. He felt extremely supported while at UHD. He worked in the IT department. He was very involved with student activities. He was very involved with sports, played all of our sports, loved his college experience, but felt that after he graduated, that support, that love, that embracing went away. And so he lost that community. He lost that network. And as a result, he struggled. So in my effort to help him get a job, and so we did get him a job with Lowe's, we found tremendous resources just looking. But again, it was because I knew this kid and wanted to help him that we were able to get him what he needed beyond college graduation. So I just want to make sure we're not forgetting those students as well, because so many, they want to keep working for us. We tell them, you graduated, go get a good job. And they're like, but I don't want to leave. I love UHD. I want to stay. So a lot of our students struggle in that way. And I just am hoping that these students aren't forgotten or left out in whatever efforts we look forward to.
Thank you, Rhonda. You know, we only have a few more minutes, and I think it's we need to maybe pivot and talk a little bit about mental health as a basic needs issue, and especially post-COVID. Can you talk a little bit about what you have seen in terms of mental health needs and how they're being addressed at the national level?
Mental health is a basic need. I think, I'm so glad you brought this up. Good. Because we can't have this conversation about basic needs security and not talk about mental health. We think at Hope, it's so important that we hired another senior director on our staff Dr. Sarah Abelson, and she has spent her career working with schools to better support mental health. I think if you were to look at the general population, you'd say that the vast majority of Americans from all ages, races, generations, and backgrounds are going to say that the U.S. has a mental health crisis. And we also know that students, who many are facing financial distress and all of these, other concerns about basic needs security, are disproportionately effective. So I'm just inviting us to think about mental health not in isolation from this whole system that's been failing students. I'm going to give you a couple of stats, and I'm going to look at these. We did see, like you mentioned, that the COVID-19 pandemic significantly worsened mental health stress on students nationally and in Texas. In our 2020 Basic Needs Survey, 1/3 of the Texas students that we surveyed experienced anxiety or depression and said that the COVID-19 pandemic had become a source of mental health stress. So institutions need mental health services now more than ever, and those services have to be a campus-wide priority, not just the responsibility of an overburdened staff or a mental health counseling center. And yet we're going to run into many of the same kind of structural issues that we were talking about earlier, that perhaps mental health is siloed, or there isn't enough financial support in order to be able to meet the student demand for mental health needs. I'd encourage you to consider where mental health services are located, whether there is first of all, does everyone know how to access mental health services on campus? Everyone, that faculty included, right? And whoever is working in your basic needs centers, do they know how to access mental health services? And can they connect a student to mental health? Just like you demonstrated so well a few minutes ago, can you walk a student to where they need to go? Or is there someone physically located nearby who can also help do that? I think there's an article that came out earlier today, possibly even in the Chronicle of Higher Education, that more and more students are comfortable with accessing services virtually. So thinking about how can you connect to other organizations that might be providing these services. So you mentioned the planning grant with the Texas Higher Ed Coordinating Board. And one thing that I'm really excited about is that I believe that we at the Hope Center are working in partnership with the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute, who is also located in Texas. And we're working with Meadows to be able to provide support to institutions through the implementation part of the grant.
Excellent.
To not only address some of these questions around how do we build out our basic needs task force? How do we really kind of evaluate or assess our ecosystem of support, and what action steps do we need to take on campus to make that better? But how do we specifically address students' mental health concerns? I think there are a couple things that I'm going to give you a couple things that you can do. Put information about mental health services and crisis numbers on your course syllabi. Continue emphasizing overall health and well-being, including basic needs prevention programs, and then provide access to virtual counseling.
Thank you. And I'll add another one, a shameless plug, because this is going to be beginning November 18th. We will have the first of monthly mental health first aid workshops that we are hoping that the entire campus eventually will participate in. Our own counseling staff and our director of counseling, Naomi Perez, and Dr. Pamplin are all involved in this. And mental health training is a way to identify when someone is in need of support, triage, and refer. So no matter where you work, if you're a faculty member or you work in the registrar's office or you work in student life, we all encounter students, just as Dr. Pamplin just said, where you see them again and again in the same clothes, or you see that they're under distress. What do you do with that? And so that's what this training is about. We hope that every student-facing individual, from faculty to staff, will take this. The first one will be on the 18th. We're just about out of time. I hear the call to vote. But I think that this has been such a powerful conversation, and for me, some important baseline things to always remember. First of all, it starts with all of us, as Dr. Pamplin said, kind of slowing down, which is so hard to do, and paying attention to the student, right? It takes a moment to notice somebody's wearing the same clothes, or that they're always munching the moment they get in your office, or whatever it is, and to ask. Making community partnerships, which is something that we're great at. What are they saying? Oh, UHD, the UHD, and more. Why don't I just leave it at that? What I do want you all to know in our last minutes, and thank you so much, Leanne, for being with us today and sharing this incredible information, is that in 3 weeks, is Hunger and Homelessness, National Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week. And that is really going to be the launch of many of the activities and support programs that we are going to ramp up for students. Students will see a new website that will consolidate everything UHD has to offer into a single place. We have Jay, do you want to mention our campaign?
That's terrific.
which is just, go,
I was just
please.
going to say that's terrific. That's bottom line. A lot of this comes down to money.
Yeah.
Money.
We
Students need money.
Yeah, and we have a lot of grants out there. So I think our plan is multi-pronged. It is giving a fish and teaching to fish at the same time. We got to do both, right? On this week, we'll have a student panel talking about basic needs from their perspective. We're going to participate in an activity called Rise Against Hunger. I don't know if any of you have ever participated in this, but it is a private organization that comes in, and together our campus will pack 20,000 meals in 2 hours. If you don't believe it can happen, I'm telling you it can. It is a great community event, but also wonderful. These meals will go out across the world to support others who are hungry in our world community. We will have a health fair that the sports and fitness area supports, and we'll also have a program on generational wealth, and that's the teaching to fish, right? You know, how to build generational wealth. So look for all of those announcements coming up really, really soon. Thank you again, Leanne. Let's give Leanne a hand. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thanks for all of the people who helped put this together. Thank you, Monica, for putting together the beautiful slides. They're nice looking, right? And thank you for all the people who have participated. Let's go out and vote right now. We should be fired up. Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you, Dr. Blanchard.
Thank you.